Now back to more with GTO. Good old boys.
Hey guys, welcome back to our podcast. We have just got into a very, very good conversation with Mr. Johnny Johnson. Dr. Ray Baker here is with us. And what we're going to do now is we're going to cover how FishLung, what bubbles FishLung make, how bubbles play a part in the oxygen that the fish retains and picks up through their gill plates. So, Johnny, can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. What we're doing at FishLung with the technology that we have is we're feeding oxygen, and the percentage of oxygen that we use is a lot of folks have used oxygen in the past, i.e. tanks. And the problem with tanks is if they're not properly handled, if you ever knock the nozzle off, then a tank becomes a missile because it's under pressure. And that's not something you want in a boat. Plus the level of oxygen, your purity of oxygen in a tank is typically a medical grade, and it's a real high level, and oxygen at that level is an accelerant to any type of fire. So to avoid all of that, we've dialed our oxygen percentage back, and we put out roughly a 50 to 60% purity on our oxygen, and that's on purpose. But we feed that through a specialized stone that fractionalizes that oxygen down to a really, really microscopic bubble. It's called a nanobubble. And in that stone, it takes about 20 to 23 psi line pressure to be able to force that oxygen through that stone. But in doing so, it will saturate your live well with bubbles that are so small that you can't see them. And the cool thing in all of our testing, when we do a tank that's roughly 25 gallons, which is really about all a typical live well is going to hold anyway. Mm-hmm. You can test for oxygen into the far corners without stirring, without doing anything, and that oxygen purity, that ppm is the same anywhere in that tank. It's the same over the stone as it would be right into the corner. So when you can get those bubbles broke that small, and you can saturate them out in that type of, that small of a bubble, it gets everywhere. So your fish don't have to park their noses right over top of that stone. And and actually, the bubbles that you do see, those are the larger ones. They're going to come from that stone. They're going to go to surface and break, and they really don't do anything. It's the bubbles that you don't see that's doing the work.
Oh, so what you see is just for us to say we're really taking care of the fish. Look at their bubbles.
Yes. It's the ones that you don't see, and that's the cool thing. And when and I've done this, I've completely turned the system off and walked away from it. Come back 24 hours later, and still get a reading from a system that was reading 18 parts per million. Mm-hmm. Come back 24 hours later, and that water still be holding 16 parts per million.
With
nothing.
Wow.
It would, because the bubbles, when they're that small, they'll stay in that water column, and they'll, instead of surfacing and breaking because they're so small, they'll stay submerged and they'll stay in that water, and a bubble that is that small, a fish can actually benefit from.
Does it go to their gill plates and stick to the gill plates, and that's how they utilize the oxygen?
It is
through the capillaries in their
yes.
In their gills?
It is a large bubble, something that's a 1/4 inch in diameter, which is what a typical stone is going to release.
Okay.
All right, that fish is not benefiting from that. That bubble's going to come right out of that stone. It's going to go to the surface. And it's going to break.
And that's where the oxygen goes out. Mm-hmm. It's on the surface.
Yes, and that's been the problem in the past with bubbler systems, and that's same thing today. These do-it-yourself bubbler systems, they're just putting air into a bubbler that's going from that stone straight to the surface. That's not benefiting a fish. Mm-hmm. You've got to break that. You got to break it up and get those little tiny bubbles, and our stone is capable of that. None of these others are capable of that. And then you take into account that each one of our bubbles is 50 to 60% oxygen. That's huge.
That's amazing.
Yes.
That's where you get your parts per million up so
exactly.
much. Because you got so many nanobubbles down in the tank that the fish can utilize them and they don't escape.
That's right. That's right.
Okay. That makes perfectly good sense.
Yes.
And then as far as the stress level on a fish, the more oxygen that fish gets, the less he's going to be stressed, and he's
That's
just
right.
going to calm down, even though he is in an enclosed environment.
That's right. Now, you take it from the fish can physically recover from what's occurred, which is the catch. Okay. The fish is no longer in jeopardy of dying because of lack of oxygen. Now it's just in captivity. Okay.
Okay.
So a few hours later, the fish can be released, and that's all it suffers from is captivity. That's not nearly as bad on that fish as being caught and not being able to recover, and then the stress of that, and a lot of the other things that we do just create more and more stress on that fish. Whereas if you could just put it into an environment that has a really high oxygen percentage in it, that fish can recover, and that fish can thrive through that as far physically it can. And then you simply release it.
Right, and then the fish swims off.
That's right.
Everything's fine. Everything's good. Okay, do you still have to fizz a fish if you catch them
Yes.
deep in the summer?
Yes, everything that you typically would do for fish care, if you catch a fish deep, you still have to fizz it. If you injure a fish, if you gill hook it, if you get it down in the throat, gut hook it, all those things that you typically would do for that fish, you still need to do. If that fish dies, you need to get that fish out of your live well. I mean, we're not a hospital, you know.
Why?
Because the things that will, it's that fish will release the same thing that occurs typically every day in a live well still will occur, and it will still kill your other fish. It's your pH balance will get way off if fish dies in your water. So if you do have a fish that dies in your live well, you need to dump that water. You need to pump that out and put clean water back in it. Your oxygen system, FishLung, will reoxygenate your water within about 15 minutes. So don't worry about that. You can get your oxygen back up.
Got you. So
But
there
get that-
again is
but
the
get that-
oxygen
yeah.
level.
But you want to get that toxic water out of there.
Can oxygen levels help a fish recover from getting caught deep in the throat or getting a gill plate broke, or if they're bleeding?
I don't know that, to be honest with you, but I do know this. If you go to the hospital injured, the first thing they're going to do is put oxygen in your nose.
That is correct. That is correct.
That every time I've ever seen anyone go to the hospital, one of the first things they're going to do is stick an IV in their arm, and they're going to stick oxygen in their nose.
Okay. We can't stick oxygen in a fish's nose, but
No,
we
sir.
can make them get it through the gill plate.
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
Now, Paul, from personal experience working at some of the tournaments, we have taken some of those injured fish that seem to be floating, if you will, and we have introduced them to an oxygen-rich tank, if you will, as well. We have great success with their survivability. But if we didn't add that, we really can't say with 100% certainty. But then again, we take that and to see if it does work. And it did work. So we have created an environment for the fish to get in that was oxygen deprived. We put it into an environment that there's oxygen there. So that makes the betterment for the fish and the survivability of the species itself.
Okay, now what you're talking about, you go to a tournament, they turn the fish loose, they go weigh your fish, they go to the edge of the dock, they throw them in the water, and some of them sit there and come to the top, and they go on their side. Some of them barely swim,
Yes,
but
sir.
you can actually go up, and some of them sink to the bottom.
Yes, sir.
All right, so you can actually get those, and the ones that's on the top making a little bit of movement, you can put them in your live well with the FishLung system, which y'all have done, and it will revive the fish after how long?
From my personal experience, I've done that. I conducted this exercise numerous times, and generally for between, say, 10 to 15 minutes, if that fish has the possibility of surviving, it'll start, you can see definitely a movement of the fish. If not, sometimes they get so revived, as JJ has mentioned, it may be to the point they can't come back from that. And
That's
that
when it
does
gets
happen.
down to 4 parts per million,
Yes,
and
sir.
then it
Yeah.
starts the brain damage part.
That's when that fish has been in a live well too long, that had too low of a ppm.
Okay,
And-
too
and-
long, too
yes,
low
sir.
of oxygen.
Yep, and that damage has occurred, and it's permanent, and that fish is not going to survive.
And that's just the beast of it.
That's it.
If you don't have, there's no way to get good oxygen into a live
No, sir.
well other than this FishLung.
I mean, you think about this. The live well came out. Ranger Boats introduced it, 1973?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I guess.
All right. You think about 1973 to present. 2024. Look at the advancements in our engines. Look at the advancements in our trolling motors. Look at the advancements in our electronics. But that live well hadn't changed since 1973.
Correct. That is
The
it.
only thing that has changed is the size of it and the size of the pumps that feed it.
Right. That's a very good point. We're ready to go to another break right now. When we come back, guys, we're going to talk about the myths over the years that everybody has listened
We'll
to
be
and
back
doing
with
it
more
now.
GTO Good
Y'all
Old
come back to see
Boys
us.
after this.